Well, today we're looking at Lamentations 3:19 through 36, getting us past a good chunk of chapter 3. We're looking at the reality of God's love. We've already looked at verses 18, 19, and 20, but because they're transitional in nature, I'm going to go back over verses 19 and 20 to move us into away from, as a matter of fact, the poet's bitterness and sorrow from all of his pain and suffering. In verse 21, as it turns out, he began to recognize the reality of hope. Pain and suffering are neither the total nor the final picture. Yes, there's sin, there's judgment, there's discipline, but hope is a realistic expectation. For what? For something better. And that something better includes the things that flow out of God's goodness, His grace, mercy, and forgiveness. But first, we have to think about how Lamentations is put together. It's nice to recall what's happened in these first two chapters that painted a very black picture of what? Of pain, suffering, death, exile, poverty, hunger, cannibalism, darkness, lack of direction, lack of an end in sight, no light at the end of a tunnel, inner agony, bitterness, and gall, lack of personal peace, unheard prayers for help, nobody's listening, feeling trampled down into the dust, affliction, downcast, no hope. The poet gave this bleak black picture as a backdrop against the glittering hope he was about to unveil. Now, anybody's looked at diamonds before is probably familiar with the way they're typically shown. They're bought out, a handful of diamonds, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and they're placed on a piece of black velvet. The backdrop of black velvet highlights the intended enhancement of beauty of what is about to be shown, the brilliance of pure diamonds. The contrast is purposeful. It's intended to enhance the beauty of what is to be seen. So, let's get right into our verses, beginning with verse 19, Zayin. And let me read Lamentations 3:19 through 21. Remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood and bitterness. This is a personal, individual description of the poet's hard times during this time of discipline. Surely my soul remembers and is bowed down within me. Reflection on what he sees and feels isn't helping. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. It certainly wasn't verses 19 and 20. So this must refer to something about to be discussed. Is something to recall to mind is something he has not yet recalled. So we'll hold that in abeyance while we translate these 6 lines as we're accustomed to doing. Line 1, Yahweh, remember my pain, my suffering, my sin, the bitterness coming from my experiences. Remember all that, Lord. My remembering wears down my soul, but there is something for me to think on. and it gives me relief and hope. That hope doesn't come by positive thinking, by the way. It doesn't come by denying or minimizing the pain and suffering that's being endured, but by turning in faith to the God who is faithful. Now let's take a look in verses 22 and 24, the Hebrew letter Ket. Lamentations 3, 22, 23, and 24. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease. He's reflecting back now on the nature of Yahweh. For his compassions never fail. You've heard this phrase any number of times. Verse 23, they are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. That sounds strange. We're going to see in a minute how we have been looking at his faithfulness without realizing it. Verse 24, the Lord is my portion, says my soul. Sounds like the Levites. We'll talk about that in a minute. Therefore I have hope in him, the Lord. Our version of these 6 lines from verses 22 through 24 are where encouragement begins. Where does it begin? In the covenant love that leads Yahweh to mercy, loving mercy that never ends. Let me translate into our jargon. Yahweh's love is faithful and eternal. It's infinite. His mercies never fail. In fact, his mercies renew every day. His faithfulness to me is beyond imagining. Just like the Levites, Yahweh himself is my inheritance, my all in all. In Yahweh I have hope. Worldly goods and pleasure drop off in consequence to God's being your portion. If God is all you need, if God is enough, then what the world offers will not draw you away. Psalm 16:5. The Lord is the portion of my inheritance and my cup. Thou dost support my law. If you're everything to me, Lord. My inheritance, my cup runneth over. You support me in my life. Verse 6. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Lines here are the boundaries around where you've set me and what you've called me to are in pleasant places. Indeed, my heritage is beautiful to me. And Psalm 73:21 through 24, when my heart was embittered and I was pierced within, I was turmoil inside, and then I was senseless and ignorant. I was like a beast before you. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You have taken hold of my right hand. With your counsel you will guide me, and afterwards receive me to glory. I don't have to sweat it now. You're in charge. You got me by my hand. You lead me, you guide me, and eventually you're going to take me into the glory of eternity future. Well, let's move on to verses 25 through 27, Hebrew letter Tet. Lamentations 3:25 to 27. Yahweh is good to those who wait for him, to the person who seeks him. It is good that he waits silently. That's the one doing the seeking for the salvation of Yahweh. It is good for a man that he should bear the yoke in his youth. It's good if you get connected with Lord while you're young. One wag has said, to wait is not to loiter here. The waiting is to be expectant waiting. You're waiting for the Lord to do something, to say something, to move you somewhere for some purpose. So let's look at our translations of lines 25, 6, and 7. Yahweh treats his own with goodness. That's who he is. To those souls who are his. So there's a catch there. He treats everyone with goodness, but in particular, those who are his soul will be refreshed. It's good to wait without grumbling for Yahweh's deliverance. That takes patience, folks, because his deliverance is in his time. Line 5, a man is wise to accept Yahweh's will from his youth. Don't wait till you're an old guy, an old dude, to connect with Yahweh and look for him. Clearly, waiting quietly on God is not the typical path. It requires complete submission to Yahweh and perhaps even becoming an outcast in culture, in your own society. And the poet's going to advise us of this next in Yud, Y-U-D, verses 28 through 30. So let me read Lamentations 3, 28, 29, and 30. Let him sit alone, the one who's seeking God. Let him sit alone and be silent, since he has laid it on him. Since Yahweh has asked you to sit and wait, do it quietly. Do it all by yourself. Don't make an issue of it. Just wait for him expectantly. Let him put his mouth in the dust. While you're waiting, keep your mouth shut. Listen. Perhaps there is hope, and that perhaps is a certainty, folks. Let him go, give his cheek to the smiter, let him be filled with reproach. Don't be mistaken. Pain and suffering will likely come with judgment, but hope is knocking at the door. Now, our lines look like this. Remaining in solitary silence without grumbling of one's misfortune. That's what's being advised. When Yahweh calls you to it, shut up your mouth from all complaining, because hope still remains. Stand and absorb the slaps of discipline and your fill of insults. They will come. Moving right along, Kaf, verses 31 through 33. It's from Lamentations 3, 31 through 33. For the Lord will not reject forever. That was something that individuals in the midst of suffering and pain tend to forget. That doesn't mean God has rejected him. Discipline and rejection are not the same. For he causes grief. Yahweh causes grief. Then he will have compassion according to his abundant loving kindness. So, Yahweh can bring grief, but that's not the end goal. the elements of his discipline. For he does not afflict willingly, this is not what he prefers, or grieve the sons of man. That's not what God wants, but he will do it for discipline purposes to bring you back to himself. Some translate, by the way, abundant loving kindness as steadfast love. It's the kind of love that in the Old Testament is considered the covenantal love God offers his people. Micah described that a bit after Israel had gone a time of judgment for worshiping other gods. And Micah, of course, is after this destruction by Babylon. So this is later that Micah makes these statements in 7 verses 19 and 20. He, Yahweh, will again have compassion on us, Israel, of course. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. He's going to forgive us, folks. Yes, he will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. He will give truth to Jacob and unchanging love to Abraham, which he did swear to our forefathers from the days of old. Now, how do we translate those 6 lines? God's discipline is temporary. Line 3, Yahweh brings grief and compassion both when he disciplines. Line 5, his abundant love means discipline is not his top desire for us. Well, moving right along, Lamed, verses 34, 5, and 6 from Lamentations. I want to leave that in out for some reason. 3:34 through 36. To crush under his feet all the prisoners of the land, to deprive a man of justice in the presence of the Most High, to defraud a man in his lawsuit. Of these things, all these things above, the Lord does not approve. Yahweh is never fickle, folks, and he's never unfaithful. Let's look at Isaiah 54:10. See what Isaiah says in comparison with what the poet here has just said. For the mountains may be removed, and the hills may shake, but my loving kindness, guess who's talking? My loving kindness will not be removed from you, and my covenant of peace will not be shaken, says Yahweh, who has compassion on you. When was Isaiah making these statements? Considerably before Babylon's destruction of Judea, Jerusalem, and the temple. He is saying the mountain, there's things going to be shook up because of the Babylonians. But my kindness, loving kindness, it's yours. My covenant of peace, it's yours. I will have compassion on you. So Isaiah has made for God the statements that all will come back to the proper state after the discipline for your disobedience. So no matter what Babylon does, Israel will eventually be right with God again. The 6 lines that we just looked at, as we see them, and then comparing God's loving treatment of his people against the inhumanity of man. Mistreatment of prisoners, this comes from man. Denial of justice, corrupting of rights. Let's translate those 6 lines. Yahweh's goal is not to crush all of those on the earth. He does not intend to deprive anyone of justice while in his presence. He can't deny people justice. He is justice. To subvert, line 5, to subvert a man's legal cause is not what he does or approves. Yahweh has never failed Israel. Count on it. Jeremiah has something to say here, 33, verses 25 through 36. It'll take a bit to get through it, but he's got some things to say. Thus says Yahweh, if my covenant for day and night stand not, in other words, if my statements about day and night don't hold, and the fixed patterns of heaven and earth I have not established, if they're liable to go to the fixed patterns of heaven and of earth, then I would reject the descendants of Jacob and David my servant, not taking from his descendants rulers over descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, all those negative things I won't do because those things I set up as the if clauses are not going to happen. I have set the day and night. I have fixed the patterns of heaven. I have established David as my servant on the throne forever. I will never desert or reject the descendants of David, or Abraham, or Isaac, or Jacob. But I will restore their fortunes, and I will have mercy on them. And Jeremiah is making this prophecy also just before Babylon invades. In spite of God's vengeance, when his people sin, and he does have vengeance, he's going to correct that situation as he best can. While that's true, he takes vengeance, he takes discipline, he neither forgets nor abandons his people. Patience is required. He will show back his loving kindness in his timing. Yahweh guarantees that evil will not have the last word. God will act in his own time, and next time we're going to see the condition where the poet makes a call for